Excited to see how many people were here, but very exciting to hear how far people have traveled to be here. We have a number of states represented. We've got folks all the way from the West Coast, from California, and we know it takes a lot of effort to come and to be at a gospel meeting like this. But we're most appreciative of 21st Street and the work that they do to be able to provide this gospel meeting year after year. In the past, there's certainly been times in which weather has kept individuals from coming. They've had to even cancel the meeting in the past just because of unpredictability of Oklahoma's weather. But this year we're really blessed with a wonderful weekend. I know it may not be as warm for some, but it may be too warm for others depending on where you're from. And so hopefully you'll be able to enjoy the time in which we have here together, one with another, especially the time in which we'll have to worship God and the time of a fellowship with our brothers and sisters in Christ. If you're a visitor here and you're from our community or your friends have invited you here, or classmates, co-workers, whatever the case may be, you're our honored guest, and we appreciate you coming and being here tonight. It's Friday night, so there's a lot of places you could have been tonight, especially you young people, but you chose to be here. God bless you for that. I think it's a wonderful choice in which you made, and hopefully tonight will deliver to the expectations of which many have. I appreciate David mentioning that I was special. I heard the chuckles from those I know best. I noted that. I'll be talking to you all later. But at least no one amen. So tonight, for just a little while, I want to talk to you about defending your faith. Now, of course, the things that we're going to talk about this weekend are for everybody. I got great questions in the weeks previous to the meeting. I got questions from young to old. John Spradley sent me a really nice list of questions, and I really appreciated that. It really does help me to see what are your thoughts on some of these issues, what are the concerns you might have, and what are those burning questions so that we might try to address them. Of course, we can't address them all. We'll try to address some of the biggest, largest topics out there that we can to help you in stimulating your interest in studying these things, understanding them, and especially in your sharing with others. And that really is something that we think is important as well. The most special people here tonight are young people, and we appreciate them. They are the future of the church. They are the future of all things as far as spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ. And the thing that we need to be mindful of here tonight is that not only are they the future of our congregation, they are an investment of our own because it's their faith we're interested in. If they don't stay the course of their walk of faith, then we don't have a very bright future. I'm excited for the brightness of our future right now. I'm excited to see how many young people are here. I'm excited to see them at the New Year's meeting and their interactions and activities and even their servitude at times and the things in which they do for our congregations. Hearing the young men tonight in the song leading, but even in the prayer, fantastic prayer. I appreciate that so very much. I've heard them just a month ago, as you did as well, at the young men's talk at the New Year's meeting. The future's bright, but we got to keep it burning bright by investing in our young people. Young ladies as well, you have an important role. A lot of you may, through your desire of searching towards a career, you may search a path that's along the lines of teaching. Well, you're going to have a great responsibility, not only of raising your families, but you may in fact have the opportunity to teach others and to influence them as well. Our universities today turn out atheists. That's really one of their primary goals today. They really want to educate and enlighten you to really liberate you from things that are suppressing you, such as religion. And so we want to address some of those things here this weekend. We want to hopefully build your faith so that you will be strong and you will understand that the things in which they teach may be very intriguing and in fact sound very convincing, as they do. And they're difficult things in which you have to work through in your mind and think about on a very critical level. But unfortunately, what they don't tell you is the problems that underline some of the theories that are out there that they're teaching in the schools today. And even though they may push them as practically fact, what we'll show here tonight is as they are far from fact, and in fact in the theoretical world, they end up having a lot of issues because there's even debate amongst themselves, even though they try not to show you the infighting that goes on in the scientific world. So tonight we're going to talk about defending your faith, and there's some places we want to start, and we really want tonight to be a good foundation moving forward in this series of meetings. And tonight we'll talk about some things that will get into some of the sciences. We will address the Big Bang, for instance. but we want to talk about some things from a scriptural perspective and compare the Christian worldview to that of a atheistic worldview, and how they actually even try to twist terminology we use every day, even in the faith, such as the word faith, and ultimately try to use it in such a negative way as to really create doubt in your minds and create the doubt in minds of others as well. So the best place to start is really kind of a definition of what is faith. And you'll note here I use a lot of PowerPoint, so you don't have to look at me from this point forward in the evening. All of it here is going to be up on the PowerPoint. So when it comes to faith, when we look at the definition of faith, let's just start with Merriam-Webster's dictionary. There's 4 points in which they point out in their definition of faith. They state that it is something believed, especially with strong conviction. They also say that it is belief and trust in and loyalty to God. It's also stated that belief in the traditional doctrines of a religion, and then note number 4, firm belief in something for which there is no proof. Something of no proof. I'll come back to that here in just a minute. Let's look at the Oxford Dictionary. Also for comparison, it says that it is complete trust or confidence in someone or something, and also secondly, strong belief in God or in the doctrines of a religion based on spiritual apprehension rather than proof. So you can see the two definitions are very comparable one to another, and they hit some of the same basic elements. And I will note, though, this is from a worldly perspective, these kinds of terms, and can in fact be influenced by society over the course of time. And we've seen that in dictionaries. Certain words of times past have slowly changed and altered in their definition based on how people use them today. Well, this is how the word faith is used in our society and in our English language today. The basis of it is, number 1, a belief. A belief in something in which it goes on to say, something in which you have conviction in, something in which you trust and put your confidence in. Number 2 that stands out is obviously the idea of God. God is associated here, and there's also the association of religion in and of itself as it relates to God. And then the big one that we kind of emphasize there was the idea of no proof. No proof. So what the world wants you to see in your faith is that it's something in which you do without proof. And I'm appalled by it. I hope you're appalled by it, because the world is trying to twist something that isn't intended to convey this idea, as we'll see here tonight. What I also don't like is how the Oxford Dictionary, it's kind of hard to see down here at the very bottom, but the Oxford Dictionary, being the masters of word usage, they ultimately include this idea, subtle but has a huge impact, and it's the word apprehension tied to spiritual. Spiritual apprehension, what does that mean? Well, one definition of apprehension is fear, unease, mistrust, and doubt. So what they're trying to say is if you are spiritually inclined or spiritually driven, then you really doubt all other things that challenge your spiritual status or the things in which you believe. And so they want to convey that kind of idea. But secondly, this word has another meaning, and it's also very subtle but has huge impact. The word also can mean arrest, imprisonment, or control. And so it means that you're controlled spiritually. And in fact, what it's really trying to convey is that all religion is just like a cult. All religion is practically cultish in that you're being controlled in your mind so that you don't align yourself with society and get yourself in the right state as all of those who are in the atheistic standing. So the unfortunate part here is that they say faith is a mindless activity or status. Now, how do you feel about that tonight? Well, I've got a couple of degrees, and I would have to say I would counter that pretty quickly, because that's a huge investment for nothing if I don't use my mind. But that's what I'm paid to do in my particular occupation. And in fact, all of you have a certain amount of intellect, certain amount of skill, and they're challenging it at the very core and principle, saying you don't use your mind because you allow it to be controlled by either someone else, some group of individuals, or some fake deity. That's what they're trying to imply. Well, our faith is certainly under attack. If you're to go out there and search the internet for things pertaining to faith, you're not just going to find the things that are positive and promoting of faith. You're going to find things that attack faith. I've been careful to show some things that I think are fairly disparaging, but not ultra negative. And there are some things out there that are downright disgusting to even look at. But some of the things that I want you to be aware of them is this one, for instance, is a kind of a little catch saying. God is a challenge because there is no proof of his existence, and therefore the search must continue. They're conveying the idea is that God's never showed himself. God hasn't showed himself to our society and our culture and our day and our age. In fact, he hasn't shown himself to anyone except all the way back in the ancient times of the Old Testament. I saw one disparaging poster, for instance. It said, God, greatest player of hide-and-go-seek ever. Because people out there don't think God exists because he's never physically shown himself to us. Well, that's difficult, isn't it? Those of us of faith is trying to tell people that there's a God, but we can't say, well, there he is. Or, look at him, he's working over here. Or he's doing certain things. And that makes it difficult. But what it does for the faithless individual, it gives them an opportunity to attack. Put us in a defensive position and really tighten the screws on those who may be weak in the faith and could cost them their faith. Here's another one. This one's disparaging as well. The things Christians have to believe with no evidence. I already have a problem with that first statement, but let's go on and look. Number one, God exists. Number two, the Bible is true. Number three, Jesus lived. Number four, Jesus' mother was a virgin. Number five, Jesus was executed and raised after 3 days. And number six, there is life after death. Are things no sane person should believe without good evidence. Now I'll say, even though the most negative part of that seems to be the last line, I would actually say that is a valid statement. No sane person should believe anything without good evidence. But the idea that they instill there is the idea that we believe with no evidence. We don't believe with no evidence. We have evidence. People I talk to, young people especially, who have left the faith, I try to come back and point to them the things they've already learned they know is evidence, but they've dismissed because some of the other things they've learned seems to outcompete it, or has taken a control of their mind that they can't see past. We need to remember the things in which we've been taught. We need to remember those things which are evidence and ultimately compartmentalize them and keep coming back to them. We have to maintain a certain foundation, a certain root in the things we know are true. Certain things do add up to evidence. Here's another one. Faith isn't a virtue. It is the glorification of voluntary ignorance. Offensive, for sure. Offensive, for sure. But these are the kinds of attacks that are out there. And here's another one. For those who believe, no proof is necessary. For those who don't believe, no proof is possible. That's two extreme end members, and it shows the other side as well. But in all reality, the idea of all of these signs is really kind of conveying is we don't believe in proof, we don't believe in evidence, and we certainly don't work with facts. Is that true? Is that true? Well, let's weigh that tonight, and let's see where we stand in all things. Ultimately, the world wants to convey those who are Bible believers, who believe in God, who are Christian, as being these faith-blinded individuals. Because supposedly we don't require proof in our religion. Well, let's look at the biblical definition of faith for a moment here, and let's realize and note how very different it is from what Merriam-Webster, Oxford, and many others try to convey to us from a societal standpoint today that are popularized views. The Bible really makes very clear in the book of Hebrews, Hebrews chapter 11, the whole chapter is focused on faith and examples of faith. But it starts off in verse 1 by giving a very clear definition of what faith is. It says there, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Now right off the bat, you see something that says something not seen, and you go right back to the mental image I just put on the board for you. And that's what most people do because that's what's been told them, is it's blind. And therefore it is not something in which we really use our senses for. We're just moved internally from a spiritual standpoint. But that's not what it says there. In fact, let me read the New American Standard Update, which says, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. What I pull from this is a couple of things. Number one, there's the idea of a substance or an assurance of things we hope for, which is the foundation to our faith. This word comes from a Greek word called hypostasis, which means confidence. So we ultimately put confidence in something, and that is the thing in which faith is founded upon. The hypostasis word really comes from two conjugates. The word hupo means by or under, and then the stasis part means standing or state. And when you put the two words together, the real meaning of it is understanding. Understanding. That which we have confidence in is based on an understanding. Already we've got an issue, don't we? Because what the world wants to perceive as faith is a mindless activity or venture. But what the Greek words convey in the scriptures, such as God intended through inspiration, is it's actually the basis of an understanding. It's intellectual. It's something that's done with the mind through thinking. Number two, we also find here the word evidence and conviction. The evidence or the conviction of things not seen. That's what faith is also, according to this definition. It comes from the word elekos, which means proof. In fact, when you see there in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 17, to reprove, it is to show proof of things. That's where the word comes from. So the word means proof. So if you would allow me, to paraphrase this passage using these words and these definitions, the phrase is, now faith is the understanding of things hoped for, the proof of things not seen. Now you think about that for just a moment, and what is the problem here with this definition from the Bible versus the definitions we saw just a moment ago? They're in direct opposition with one another. We saw just a moment ago that faith is a non-understanding, non-intellectual, no proof situation. But the Bible says, to the contradiction of that, that is not the case. And so it leaves us to wonder, doesn't it? Leaves us to wonder. Why would the world try to twist an idea that originated in the ancient times, and then today it is, in fact, not only left behind, it is in complete opposition to the idea which it originally conveyed? Because it's faith under attack. They're attacking it. And they're attacking it by controlling the things that have the greatest influence. The schools, the literature, the entertainment, heavily divested in the government. It's at the basis of the entire scientific community today and embraced globally. And through its popularization, it ultimately causes young people to stray away from their biblical faith, their Christian faith, because the constant attacks, the constant barrage of bombardments is too much for the individual to overcome at times. You know, there's a lot of things I can sleep through. I can sleep through tornado sirens, something you got to learn to do here in Oklahoma. Maybe not the safest approach. Thunder in cars, by trains. We used to live near a train trestle, and the trains would go by in the middle of the night. I learned to sleep through that. But you know what aggravates me more than anything when I'm trying to sleep? The dripping of a faucet, the ticking of the ceiling fan. Why? Even though they're small, and even though they're subtle, they're repetitive, they're redundant. They keep coming. They just don't stop. And it just starts to aggravate you. And it finally irritates you. Finally moves you to do something. That's kind of like the attacks on faith. It just keeps chipping away at you until you finally realize you've been undercut at the foundation. And the next thing that happens is you potentially fall. Young people, I want to say this. If you are being challenged in your faith, and you're struggling and you don't know where to turn, number one, you need to realize you are not alone. And number two, a lot of us have already been through that. And so, in a weekend meeting like this, reach out. Reach out to me, reach out to others, reach out to one another. You'll be You'll be amazed at how many of you probably have the same questions. We'll probably explore that a little bit tomorrow when we do some question and answer sessions together. And you're going to find out we've all had to deal with this to some degree. Maybe some more than others, and maybe at different levels of different studies and research and things like that. But you have been there, and we have been there. We've all been there. We've all been challenged by these issues because it's the world that is around us. Well, let me look at this for just a moment. Tonight, give you a little bit of science to kind of go along with the things in which we're studying. When it comes to the origin of the universe, what does your faith tell you? Well, Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And every Bible believer believes that God is the creator of all things. Of course, what happens is, typically, you believe in the 6 days of creation, just as Genesis tells you. Later on, if you were like me, you start to study geology, you start to study biology, you start to deal with evolution, you start dealing with the age of the earth, and all of a sudden now, what do you try to do? You try to balance those ideas, and you try to literally convolute them together and try to find a way to weigh them in some happy medium. And it's dangerous. And the problem there is you abandon the basics, and ultimately you drive God out of the equation, that he doesn't have to be the creator because all these other things are doing the job for him. A naturalistic approach. But when it comes to your faith, the Hebrew writer not only talking about defining faith, actually talks about faith in this idea of the origin of the universe. In verse 3, just 2 verses after our definition, the writer says, by faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God. We also find that the idea here, again, that's underlying all of this is an understanding and an intellect, a thinking capacity within all of this. When we look at the NIV, it says, by faith we understand that the universe, not just the worlds, the universe was formed at God's command. At God's command. The point being, God is the one who brought all things into being. When he spoke, it happened. It happened. We also find the next part of that verse says, and so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. I like how the New American Standard Update actually words this part of the verse. So that what is seen was not made out of things which are visible. Now, you look at that and you say, well, again, there appears to be some kind of contradiction. Now the contradiction is within the Scriptures itself. Something seen was made by something not visible. Well, we'll explore that here for just a moment. The idea of this is creatio ex nihilo, which is Latin for creation from nothing. The Bible taught, even from the ancient days, even going back deep into the Old Testament, that when God brought everything into existence, this world, the universe, and all things, the emphasis was on is that God started with nothing. There was God, and then God created everything that we have and can see and account for today. The physical universe, our physical world, even our physical being. The idea, though, was foreign to any of the ancients. In fact, if you go back and you look at ancient philosophy, both by the Greeks and the Romans, this idea was not embraced. The idea that was embraced back in the ancient times was that everything we saw was reused and left over from a previous time, and that other things were being recycled in our universe. And it was by the power of, usually, like the Greeks, their Greek gods, it was by some other means that things were coming into existence. But the idea of creation from nothing was foreign to the ancients, except for those who believed in the Bible. Now, I ask you the question of this is, what do modern scientists think today? What is being taught in the classrooms today? Well, today, scientists have come up with this wonderful and bright idea which they refer to as the Big Bang Theory. I know there's a TV show out there, and if you go searching for the Big Bang to get educated on it, like me trying to find some information so I can pull it into my slides, you have to sift through thousands upon thousands of pictures and articles about a TV series. It's almost like they've forgotten about that there's actually a theory and it's not just something on television. But the point is that the Big Bang Theory is something that helps to scientists to explain and teachers to explain how our universe came into existence in the absence of God. A naturalistic hypotheses about how our universe came to be. Well, I can sit here and explain this to you. I'm not a physicist. It actually gets very detailed and very complex. But what I want to do is I want to read some quotes from those who are proponents of Big Bang to actually speak in their own words about what Big Bang is and what it means. First of all, according to the National Science Foundation, the leading federal agency for all scientific activities, for sponsoring, for scholarships, for supporting the universities, for all those things, they themselves have their own definition of what it is. One thing I will say about the National Science Foundation, they solicit for tens of millions of dollars every year from donors to help educate us mindless people. And it's in fact written in the first page of their publication that goes out to their donors and supporters. They are very clear about what their mission is. So obviously they're a proponent for the Big Bang. They say, according to the widely accepted Big Bang theory, now these are scientists, they're all about the facts, and right off the bat in that very definition, they've already lied to you. It is not widely accepted. In fact, in the United States, only 20% of Americans even buy into the Big Bang or something modified to be like the Big Bang. Now, question their rationale. Now question how honest they're going to be with you from everything from this point forward. And this is on their first page about the Big Bang on their website. They said, our universe was born in an explosive moment approximately 15 billion years ago. All of the universe's matter and energy, even the fabric of space itself, was compressed into an infinitesimally small volume. And as I circled there, they called it the unobservable universe, which is purely theoretical. There's nothing to prove it. It's purely theoretical. And then began to expand at an incredible rate. And as you see there, there is the expansion of the universe. In fact, an acceleration of that expansion. We talk about things having constant velocity in space. They have to believe that there's actually an acceleration that goes against all the principles that they teach in physics just to get this idea conveyed and across. But ultimately, the expansion of the universe came from a discovery by Edwin Hubble in 1929, who published the idea that he saw what are called galactic red shifts. And what that was is an ability to measure how much galaxies were accelerating away from one another. So by measuring them, he could estimate that galaxies were moving in certain directions and at certain velocities. What he realized is by actually measuring multiple galaxies, that they were all moving out from what appeared to be a center. And if he was to back calculate everything, he could bring back all the galaxies in our universe back to a centralized point. And that's just a century ago where the Big Bang started to ultimately originate this theory. Is that if everything had to come from a center point, then there had to be a starting point and an origin of the universe. And so that much certainly coincides with the biblical account. But we also find Carl Sagan, an astronomer but also renowned atheist who attacked faith before he passed, he said 10 or 20 billion years ago something happened, the Big Bang. The event that began our universe. Why it happened is the greatest mystery. What's a mystery? Something unsolved. Something unsolved. He says that it happened is reasonably clear. He's making emphasis on the expansion of the universe. All the matter in the universe was concentrated at extremely high density. He's proposing that as a hypothesis. A kind of cosmic egg. That's an illustrative form to show something that's birthing and beginning. It's quite creative, really, but it has absolutely no foundation. Reminiscent of the creation myths of many cultures. So he has to at least acknowledge, yeah, this is what creationists and Bible believers would promote as being in alignment with their beliefs or their faith. And so he throws out these negative terms, and he's chipping and attacking at Christian faith or Bible faith. But what is he building this on? Well, so far, one observation of an expanding universe and everything else theoretical. How about Stephen Hawking, one of the greatest minds of our time, a theoretical physicist, means he theorizes about things. He wrote in The Grand Design, 2010, the universe began with the Big Bang, which simply followed the inevitable law of physics. Which law, Stephen, which law? Well, he points out, he says, because there is a law such as gravity, how this applies, other than the density of mass at the very beginning, I don't know, because it's going to overcome all of that gravity. The universe can and will create itself from nothing. He just proposed creation from nothing. Creatio ex nihilo. Now, where did that idea come from? Well, he wasn't the first to propose it, was he? But he gets a lot of accolade for throwing it out there. He goes on and says, spontaneous creation. Notice he uses the word creation, but he notes the spontaneity of this idea, meaning it's like the evolutionary process. You have to have spontaneous things to ultimately occur to create life. He says, is the reason there is something rather than nothing. Why the universe exists, why we exist. The universe didn't need a God to begin. It was quite capable of launching its existence on its own. Stephen Hawking writes the rest of that book and proposes a number of theories such as M theory, as he calls it. And he spends another couple of books trying to describe this theoretical idea, which has absolutely no foundation. It is just simply the creativity of a mathematician and physicist putting ideas together that can never be tested in a laboratory and certainly will never be proven in any lifetime. But it sounds good. And the teachers will teach your children, and you young people, you've heard it in school, Big Bang is practically factual. Well, is it? Not according to these things so far. How about this one? Alex Filipenko, an astrophysicist who spoke at SETICon, which is a conference for the search of extraterrestrial intelligence. I'll give you an idea what kind of scientist he is. He's out there looking for life beyond our world. He, answering the question, did the Big Bang require a divine spark, meaning did God have to be behind it? He said the Big Bang could have occurred as a result of just the laws of physics being there. He's borrowing that from Stephen Hawking. With the laws of physics, you can get universes. Now he proposes another theory that's popular out there called multiverse. Meaning, just like in evolution, you don't need just one spark. You need to have lots of sparks to give yourself the greatest chance and opportunity to have the finely tuned universe that we have today. Because if you use random chance, you've got to give yourselves a lot of opportunities to ultimately work through and have all the things that are necessary for life in this universe to be in such a fine balance as it is to ultimately occur. And the odds of that is ridiculous numbers that I just can't even begin to fathom or convey to you, but it would be pretty much like winning that big U.S. lottery just recently. It'd be like winning that every day for the rest of your life kind of numbers and never missing a day. So those kinds of odds to ultimately make this universe. But as he says, the laws of physics, as he says, the origin of the laws of physics remains a mystery, unsolved for now, one that may never be able to solve. So he's trying to dismiss this idea, saying, I'm sure it happened. That's science? I'm sure it happened because Stephen Hawking said it, or because somebody else said it. You start to get an idea of what happens in the school systems? Because some big name thought it, some big name wrote about it, some big name spoke to other students about it, and ultimately became a part of the curriculum, and it got taught to the teachers who teach the students, who now embrace it as if it's fact. What happened to the scientific method? What happened to testing these things? What happened to actually having some proof? The thing that they say those of faith don't have. He goes on and says, the divine spark, notice it's put in quotes, was whatever produced the laws of physics. And I don't know what produced that divine spark. So let's just leave it at the laws of physics. Well, that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? That sounds pretty good. Later tonight, when I sneak off to get a snack in the refrigerator, and Audra asks me, what happened to the snacks that were in the refrigerator that was supposed to be for all the kids? It was according to the laws of physics. Let's just leave it at that. That conversation's not going to go very well. She's going to want a little more explanation to that, isn't she? But in our school system, that is tolerated and in fact embraced if the idea challenges a deity or theism that ultimately makes you accountable to somebody else. Because who wants to be accountable to anybody but you? That's what it's coming down to. That's what it's coming down to. A couple more quotes here. Alan Guth, he's a theoretical physicist. He teaches at MIT. In his lecture in 2012 on the early universe, he said the conventional Big Bang theory does not say anything about what caused the expansion. It really is only a theory about the aftermath of a bang. In the scientific version of the Big Bang, the universe starts with everything already expanding with no explanation of how that expansion started. The Big Bang says nothing about what banged, why it banged, or what happened before it banged. But yet, there it is, the Big Bang, and everyone embraces it. And then finally, from the Big Bang, or from BigBangTheory.com, it says, the Big Bang Theory is an effort to explain what happened at the very beginning of our universe. Discoveries in astronomy and physics have shown beyond reasonable doubt that our universe did, in fact, have a beginning. Talking about the expansion observations made by Edwin Hubble. Prior to that moment, there was nothing. During and after that moment, there was something, our universe. Our universe is thought to have begun as an infinitesimally small, infinitely hot, infinitely dense something, which the physicists refer to as a singularity, meaning an abnormality that ultimately creates everything. Where did it come from? We don't know. Why did it appear? We don't know. So, let me summarize with one of these catchy little toasters. Big Bang Theory. In the beginning, there was nothing. Then it exploded into everything. How and why, no one really knows. But it's accepted as fact. It's promoted on television. It's everywhere in our society. And if you question it or doubt it or even attack it, then you are questioned as far as what is your integrity, why would you do this, and you must be a spiritualist. You must be someone who's controlled mentally and can't understand just how simple it is to understand this very simple model of where you start with nothing, you get everything, and nobody knows how it works. It's interesting, isn't it? And I think we could go on and on about this stuff, but I think you're getting the point. When we come back to Merriam-Webster's dictionary or definition, when we look at this idea of no proof as far as faith goes, when we think about how this is conveyed, and especially from the biblical pattern, when we looked at Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 3 and the definition, not only in verse 1 of what faith is, but also looking at this situation where that which is seen, meaning that which is visible to us today, came from something that was not visible before. Well, what difference is there really between that idea and the Big Bang Theory? Because they're promoting exactly the same thing and say they've got the proof. In fact, if you take this definition of faith and you drop out the two things that were related to God and religion, what do you have? Something believed, especially with strong conviction, Big Bang. Firm belief in something of which there is no proof, Big Bang. And here's one more. And Merriam-Webster actually condemns this model when they actually define theory as an idea or set of ideas that is intended to explain facts or events. An idea that is suggested or presented as possibly true, but that is not known or proven to be true. That's a theory. And scientists and teachers forget all the time the difference between a theory and the difference between a fact. There's a huge difference. A fact is something observable. It is something of which you can believe, but a theory tells you a wonderful story that seems to make sense in one person's mind, but is not supported by the things necessary to believe it. It's ultimately the belief of a lie. So we have to weigh these things. We have to consider the difference between the idea of facts and the idea of theories. The fact is that we can observe an expanding universe. And it had a centralized position, at least to our best estimation. So it originated from somewhere. The theory Big Bang, string particles, quantum shifts, multiverses, and all the other stuff that goes in that. Those are purely theoretical. It means they're dreamed up. It means they're hypothesized, they're estimated. But they can't ultimately and accurately prove. So when we think about Christianity, and we think about how the world views Christianity, they estimate it something like this. They believe that we are blindfolded because of our faith, and we take these leaps of faith all the time without anything to really build upon. But what we have to think about is that sometimes even we ourselves believe this idea, because we see verses like this, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, where it says, "For we walk by faith and not by sight." And so we see faith contradicted against no sight, or something that's not seen or visible. And we perceive that we are actually to trust in God and to take steps in faith without really looking where we go and just assume we're going to land okay. Let me look at a couple of verses also along with this. How in Romans 8, 24 through 25, Paul is talking about the same thing when he says, "For we were saved in this hope, but hope that is seen is not hope. For why does one still hope for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with perseverance." How about this one in chapter 4, just before this statement in 5:7? He says there in verse 18 of chapter 4, "We do not look at the things which are seen, but the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal." We see that and we start thinking to ourselves, okay, well, then we take 5 and 7, where we walk by faith and not by sight, we can actually build the wrong picture in our minds. Why? Because you've got to look at the context of these things. The context of these passages is specific to the anticipation of the resurrected body. Something in the future that we have not yet experienced. And so when those who do not have the capability of understanding the context of the scriptures and don't rightly divide it, throw these ideas out there, then ultimately what they do is they take these passages out of context and they convey an idea that's actually unfactual. It's unfounded. It doesn't have the support of the scriptures, such as even our definition we saw earlier, that faith is an understanding and it's a proof. It's not a blind step or leap. So, blind faith. We should not be thinking about blind faith, and we should not be teaching our children, such as parents can sometimes do. I heard it. My mom's here. She'll convey it to you. Sometimes I got sent to my room to come clean it, and I questioned it, being the scientific curiosity that I was at a young age. And she said, "Because I told you so." Well, let's not make our teaching of our faith and beliefs based on "I told you so's." Let's support it, let's back it, let's defend it, and let's show them why we need to believe things. So at the end of the day, faith is really based on evidence. It's based on both direct evidence as well as indirect evidence. And in the case of Hebrews 11, verse 3, by faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command. We base that on indirect evidence. Like what kinds of indirect evidences? Well, for instance, the scriptures. We know the scriptures are supposed to be inspired by God. God breathed, according to 2 Timothy 3:16. And if we find any conflict within the scriptures, then obviously that undermines the idea of its inspiration of a single source, a single author. But what do? We test it. We search it. We determine whether or not it is consistent or if it's not. And we weigh that. And we consider that. And that becomes something working towards our faith. We're building our faith. Other claims, for instance, as we saw some of them earlier in that kind of disparaging slide about Christians believing things without evidence. Does God really exist? That's a hard one, but you're going to have to test it. Did Jesus actually live? Was he actually the Son of God, such as he claimed? We're going to test that together Sunday morning. How about the idea of the origin of life? The Bible says God created man in his image. The evolutionist says, no, man is just the random product of all of these other things that were created before him. He's just along for the ride in this chain of life. We'll test that tomorrow night in our study of evolution. And that'll be a deep dive, so come and get prepared for that. But we'll look at that, and we'll look at, does the evidence really support these theories, ideas, without proof? And so we'll go into those kinds of studies and look at those. Well, Romans chapter 1, verse 20. I like this passage because it says, "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead." What Paul is ultimately inferring here is that God, being invisible, can be seen not by direct evidence, but by indirect evidence. And for anybody that would challenge that and say that is not appropriate or satisfying to me, what do you think science does every day? The Big Bang, for instance, indirect evidence. Evolution, indirect evidence. All things in science ultimately have to be built off sometimes indirect evidence. You've got to work around those particular problems to find solutions. And so the Bible, Christianity, our faith is built sometimes on the indirect evidences, not always on the direct evidence. So when it comes to evidence of the Creator, in Acts chapter 17, in verse 24 through 28, I'm going to skip down towards the bottom. I want to convey to you, though, the idea of what God wants from you. God wants you, as Paul says, to seek the Lord. He wants you to grope for Him that you might find Him. That's what He wants of all the world, for those that don't know God. And this idea of seeking Him, Jesus Himself said in Matthew 7, verses 7 and 8, "Seek and you will find. He who seeks finds." What is being conveyed there, portrayed, is that there is evidence out there that if you go looking for it, you will find it. And with regard to this idea of groping, Job 12:25 says, "For those who grope, they grope in the dark without light." Speaking of people who grope, in Isaiah 59 verse 10, they grope for the wall like the blind, grope as if we had no eyes. Why do they use those kinds of illustrations? It's not regarding blind faith, it's regarding to using other sensory perception to find something if you can't see it with your own eyes. It means looking for things that are of indirect evidence. It's kind of like this illustration here. It's kind of like a submarine using sonar. A submarine does not have windows. At least not in the deep submarines. Maybe over at Disney World they have little windows for you to look out, but not in the deep submarines, because they'll be crushed or the windows will break and ultimately water will fill the vessel. But to see and to navigate and to avoid obstacles, they use sonar. And sonar ultimately helps steer them in and around various situations and helps them to navigate in things. The idea is they work off of indirect evidence, and they put their entire trust in it. They can't see where they're going. They can't see what's ahead of them. But through little pinging sounds and reception and calculations, they can figure out some of those things through these indirect measures. So that is what we need to do. We need to be weighing all the options of direct and indirect evidence. For instance, the Word of God. The Word of God is a great place to go. In Romans chapter 10, verse 17, Paul says, "So then faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God." It's a great place to go, and we go there all the time as Christians. But do you go there to teach your biology professor about evolution? I've heard students do it. It doesn't end well. Have you gone to your friends and family who may be atheist or doubt Christianity or the Bible and try to use the Bible to ultimately engage them? It may not be the best tactic. If we're looking at doctrinal things, sure, it's a great place to go. For those who don't believe the Bible, you can't use the Bible to teach them. Is the one particular image I found on the internet? The Bible, proof that God exists. Comic book Spider-Man, proof that Spider-Man exists. To them, that's what you're ultimately doing. You're saying, hey, look, here's the evidence. No, you've got to think about other things. And in that passage, in Acts chapter 17, or start with Romans chapter 1, verse 20, Romans chapter 1 verse 20 teaches us that to see the invisible attributes of God, you can actually look at nature. You can look at those things which he created. The creator is seen in the created. It's just like sometimes we know, for instance from a watch, that there had to be one who put it together. For a bowl that is sculpted and beautifully made, we know someone had to ultimately create it. We can see evidence of a creator in the created. And so nature itself can teach us some things, and so we can use those things in teaching others and making arguments. But even as Paul even used here in this case in Acts chapter 17 with the Athenian philosophers, he ultimately used some of their own writers. He used extra biblical evidence to ultimately make a point to them and to convince them of who God was, such as creator. God ultimately encourages honest investigation. And I know when we look through the scriptures, you find negative connotation of people testing God or testing Jesus. Less testing in a negative connotation in an attempt to actually overcome them and to counter them, to attack them. But the idea of an honest investigation, testing to see whether or not something is true, to ultimately put belief in it, that's encouraged in the scriptures. 1 John chapter 4 verse 1, beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits whether they are of God. So testing is encouraged. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 21, test all things, hold fast what is good. When it says all, there is no limit to what we can test. We should, in fact, test everything. We should not be led by blind faith. We need to test all things, but when we find that which is good, when we find that which is credible, that which is true, which is factual, then we need to put our faith in that. We need to build our faith around it. Ultimately, as we started out by saying, we need to use our intellect. God created us with intellect, and we need to utilize our intellect. Isaiah 22, verse 37, come now, let us reason together. We have intellect. We can talk about things. We can debate things. We can consider things, and we can ultimately come to conclusions. Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, whatever things are true, meditate on these things, meaning give consideration to them. Certainly we should give consideration to things that are true. As NIV says, think. Use your mind. Think. And then Matthew 22, verse 37, when asked how to serve God, Jesus responded, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, meaning you will use all of your emotional part of you, with all your soul, with all your spiritual part of you, and with all your mind, all of your intellect when it comes to serving God. Use your intellect. Don't be afraid of the things that challenge our faith. Sharpen your faith by examining it intellectually. Now, there's obviously a lot of challenges and claims out there that we have to face, and I'm just going to buzz right through these, so don't even look, act like it isn't even there. The key is, can you defend your faith? In closing tonight, ask yourself the honest question, can you defend your faith? I'll be honest with you, I can't defend everything. As much stuff as I've studied over the years, I can't defend everything because you know one thing's for sure, the bombardments come in every wave, form, shape, and they're always changing. If I was to study all the attacks on Christianity in the Bible, I would spend my entire lifetime on it, but as soon as I die, there'll just be something new. It's always adjusting, it's always modifying, it's always coming at new and different angles. And so, we're going to have to be prepared to at least defend some things and defend the most important things. And some of that we'll look at this weekend. So in closing, you need to be prepared to defend your faith. You need to be prepared. And what does that take? Well, first of all, as they say even in sports, a good offense is a great defense. You need to have a great defense. And Peter says in 1 Peter 3 verse 15, always be ready to give a defense to everyone. Notice there, always be ready. And don't hold back your defense. You need to give it to everyone. That doesn't mean attack them. It doesn't mean belittle them. It means be prepared to convince them why you're convinced, that you may pull them along in the faith as well. Jude 3, contend or fight for earnestly the faith. We need to contend it, and we need to be serious about it. How do we do this? Well, 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15, I love the King James Version on this. Study. You kids, if you want to pass a test, how are you going to get by? You're going to study. How are you going to defend your faith? You're going to have to study. How are you going to promote your faith? You're going to have to study. All things surround the idea of you've got to read, you've got to study, you've got to properly divide and apply the things of which are in your faith to your life. Why do we do this? Well, it comes down to one important thing. 1 Peter 5, 8, 9. Because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Resist him, steadfast in the faith. The devil's got all kinds of means and ploys to attack our faith. And the world today represents a lot of what the devil is proposing. We don't live in a Christian nation anymore. That used to be the idea years ago. Might have even debated that even to some degree because of all the variations of Christianity. But today it's evidently clear. People are going to have an intolerance of faith of any flavor. Ever seen that little sticker that says tolerance with all the little religious symbols? That's not saying we should promote them all. It's saying don't talk about yours, I don't want to hear about it. That's what the basis of it is. It's actually naturalist trying to say we don't want to hear about your faith, so just be quiet about it and let everybody just go along and do their own thing. That's not how it should be. We need to be prepared to defend our faith because the devil is out there and he's looking to attack us, and he is each and every day. What was biblical faith as we define tonight? Looking at the paraphrased version of Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is the understanding of things hoped for, the proof of things not seen. Through this meeting, we'll look at some additional proofs, and I hope you'll be back, and I hope we'll be able to consider some of those things, and I hope you'll ask questions. If you can't come back to this meeting, I encourage you, get my email address and send me a list of your questions. I'd be glad to try to attempt to either steer you towards things that will help you answer those questions or even answer them if I can. We need to be prepared also as teachers and as leaders and as parents. Even young people, your own peers need your help. If you're in a position that you know a lot about these subjects, you can have a huge influence on those around you and help us to encourage a strong and prosperous future in the church. I want to leave this with you. It's a quote that I found by Blaise Pascal, who in the 17th century, as a mathematician, physicist, philosopher, and Christian, said, in faith there is not enough light for those in faith there is enough light for those who want to believe and enough shadows to blind those who don't. If you're like me, and it doesn't matter how much you study this stuff, you're constantly feeling like you're on the teeter-totter. You're always feeling like, do I have enough to be fully secure in what I believe? The answer is no, because we're always studying and searching for more proof. And the problem is the proof is subtle. The evidence is limited. And even with all the information that we can gain through a study of the scriptures and looking at nature and looking at all the other things that are tangibles to this issue, it still comes down to everybody works with the same facts. And facts are left up to certain interpretations, and certain interpretations are difficult. And some interpretations can be misleading and impressionable. We have such a difficulty with dealing with faith because it's not just clear cut. It's not just God standing out one day and saying, here I am, why don't you follow me? The next time man will see Jesus will be in the judgment. They won't get the opportunity to see him face to face until time is up. And so we have to look at the evidences. We need to determine, is he truly coming back? Is he the Son of God? Was he real? Again, we'll look at that Sunday morning. We need to know those answers, and we need to be convinced of them. And the last verse I leave with you tonight, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6. We started in Hebrews 11, so it's only right that we end in Hebrews 11. The writer there says, without faith it is impossible to please God. Tonight, we're in a constant struggle, in a battle to defend our faith. And the defense of that faith is never going to end in our lifetime. We're going to have to keep battling that. We're going to have to keep dealing with the challenges of which we face. And with this world ever shifting away from faith base, away from biblical and Christian worldviews, the attacks are going to get harder. They're going to be more difficult. And all the things in which we're faced with, for you young people especially, is going to get beyond even the things I have studied and dealt with, and what others have studied and dealt with in our generations, because what people learn generation to generation is changing. I've worked with geologists, for instance, in my field, who predate plate tectonics. Now, you young people just take it for granted. We know what plate tectonics is. We know how faults work. We know how the continental plates shift around. Well, I've had to deal with geologists who still were struggling to believe it because they had been so indoctrinated with pre-theories of plate tectonics. But that just goes to show how science changes over the course of time, and those things which are promoted as fact today may be forgotten tomorrow, maybe something new we deal with down the road. So, we need to make sure we're keeping the intellect sharpened by studying, understanding, reproving, making sure we're always equipped for the battle, always ready to defend our position in faith. And not only defend it for our own selves, but to defend it for others that are around us, because it may have a huge influence, not only on your salvation, but on the salvation of someone else. The lesson's yours tonight. We don't know the hearts and the minds that are here. Maybe you're one